There is something they never teach you in school, something the wealthy understand before they ever spend their first serious sum of money. It is not a secret, exactly. It is more like a frequency, one you either learn to hear or you don't. Price is a number. Value is a feeling that outlasts the transaction. Most people confuse the two their entire lives. They chase discounts as though saving money is the same as gaining something. They equate expense with excellence. They assume that the most costly thing in the room must also be the most worthwhile. It never occurs to them to question whether the price tag was ever telling the truth. But here is what the truly wealthy know, and what they almost never say aloud. The most valuable things they own are rarely the most expensive, and the most expensive things they have ever purchased were sometimes worth almost nothing at all. This is where the education begins. Ask yourself this: who decided what something was worth, and why did you believe them? Markets price things by consensus, by perception, by narrative. A bottle of wine is priced by its label. A car is priced by its badge. A hotel suite is priced by its floor number and the view from the window. None of these prices were handed down from some objective authority. They were constructed carefully, deliberately, by people who understood that human beings rarely evaluate what something is. They evaluate what something signals. This is not cynicism. It is psychology. In 2008, researchers at Stanford conducted a study. Participants tasted the same wine, poured from different bottles, labeled with different prices. The brain scans showed something remarkable. The wine participants believed was more expensive did not merely seem better. The pleasure centers in their brains literally activated more. The price changed the experience, not the wine. This is where most people stop. They conclude that price is therefore meaningless, that luxury is an illusion. But that conclusion is too shallow. It misses the deeper lesson entirely. The lesson is not that perception is fraud. The lesson is that perception is architecture. And those who understand this do not become cynics. They become extraordinarily deliberate about what they choose to believe and why. Consider the man who buys a Lamborghini at 32. He has worked for it. He has earned the right to spend that money. He pulls up to the restaurant and feels the eyes on him. He feels the approval radiating from strangers. He feels, for a moment, like he has arrived somewhere important. Now consider what he has actually purchased. He has purchased attention from people who do not know him. He has purchased the temporary sensation of status in rooms where status is measured by the most visible object present. He has purchased a machine that costs more to insure than most people earn in months, that requires a specific grade of fuel, that will depreciate the moment it leaves the showroom floor, and that will need him to carry himself in a certain way to justify its presence in his life. What is the value of that? For some men, in some seasons of their lives, it is genuinely high. There is nothing false about wanting to feel powerful. There is nothing shallow about the pleasure of a perfectly engineered machine. But contrast that purchase with something quieter. A man who buys a Porsche 911, not the newest model, a 1994 Carrera, manual transmission, guards red. He drives it himself, maintains it himself, knows every sound it makes. He does not drive it to be seen. He drives it at 6 in the morning on an empty road, because the act of driving it is the point. That car may have cost a fraction of the Lamborghini. Its value, to him, is immeasurable. So what are you actually buying when you spend serious money? The object or the experience it produces inside you? This distinction does not get made in the transaction. It gets made long before, in the quality of your own self-knowledge. The ultra-wealthy who have lasted, who have not merely accumulated but sustained, they make this distinction before they write the check. Most people make it, if ever, only afterward, and some never make it at all. There is a category of wealth that almost never appears in magazines. It does not court attention. It does not announce itself. It has no interest in being recognized by strangers because strangers offer nothing it needs. This wealth is old enough to have watched new money perform for decades, and it has drawn conclusions. The question it has learned to ask is not, what does this cost? The question is, what will this become? Consider the man who buys a painting from an unknown artist, not because an advisor told him it would appreciate, not because it matched his interior, but because he stood in front of it for 40 minutes and could not make himself leave. He paid very little by the standards of the room he inhabits. He now owns something irreplaceable. Consider the family who has driven the same model of car for 3 generations, not because they cannot afford otherwise, they can, but because they have driven that car long enough to understand something about quality that marketing cannot manufacture. The silence of a well-built door, the way a seat holds its shape after years of use, the reliability that never requires thought. That is value, accumulated over decades, entirely invisible to anyone outside the family. Now consider the collector who has spent 40 years acquiring timepieces, not the visible ones, not the ones worn to signal anything, the ones worn because they represent the pinnacle of human mechanical ingenuity, because something in them, the craftsmanship, the intention, the centuries of refinement, speaks a language that requires no audience. He has never once bought a watch because of its price. He has bought every watch because of what it meant to him to own it. The market agrees with him now. The values have risen, but the market's opinion arrived years later and was entirely beside the point. Here is where most conversations about wealth go wrong. They treat value as something external, something an expert can certify, something a market can confirm, something a price tag can indicate. But the truly wealthy, those who have thought seriously about what they are doing and why, understand that value is an internal act. It is a discipline. Can you sit with an object, an experience, a relationship, and ask, without the presence of anyone else's opinion, whether this is worth what it costs me? Not just in money, in time, in attention, in the identity you are constructing around the things you choose. This is why the most discerning buyers in the world are almost always the quietest. They have no interest in justifying their choices to anyone. They have done the internal work before the purchase. They know what they value and why they value it. They do not need the validation of the price tag because they are not buying the price tag. They are buying the thing itself. A man once said, and he was a man of considerable means and considerable taste, that the most expensive mistake he ever made was spending money to feel a certain way in front of other people. And the most valuable things he had ever acquired, he had acquired quietly, sometimes cheaply, always deliberately. He owned a watch that cost less than his car insurance. It had belonged to his grandfather. It ran perfectly. He wore it every day. He owned 3 cars. One of them was a 1960s Mercedes SL, bought not because it was appreciating, which it was, but because he believed it represented the last era in which cars were designed entirely around the experience of the driver, before safety committees, before marketing departments, before the car became a product rather than a machine. He paid very little for it at the time. No advisor told him to buy it. He simply understood what it was. That is the posture. That is the discipline. To see clearly enough and to trust your own perception enough to act before the world catches up with you. The world always catches up. That is when the price rises. And by then, the real buyer has already moved on. We live in a world that is extraordinarily good at manufacturing desire. It knows your psychology better than you do. It knows what makes you feel inferior, and it knows exactly what product to place in front of you the moment you feel that way. It knows that the number on a price tag functions as a shortcut, a way of telling your brain that the work of evaluation has already been done. But it has not been done. It has never been done for you. It can only be done by you. The price of something tells you what the market believes about its worth at this moment, in this context, among these buyers. It tells you nothing about what it will mean to you, nothing about what it will become over time, nothing about whether the experience it produces will be worth the cost it demands, not just financially, but in every currency that actually matters. Value requires a different instrument than a price tag. It requires attention, patience, the willingness to sit with something long enough to understand it, to ask what you are really buying, and whether the thing you are buying will serve the person you are genuinely trying to become. The wealthy who last, who build not just fortunes but legacies, not just collections but taste, they know this. They have always known this. And perhaps the most precise measure of true sophistication is not what a person can afford to buy. It is knowing with complete and quiet certainty what is actually worth wanting. Price fades from memory the moment the transaction closes. Value, if you chose wisely, only deepens with time.